All right, it's done. I just hit record, you just hit play, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. For anyone who is listening for the first time today, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How's it going? I am recording this on Easter Sunday. And I had planned to try to do it yesterday so I wouldn't have to record today, but that didn't happen. So we're making it happen today, but I feel a little bit pressed for time because I want to go help my wife with dinner. So let's bring ourselves to the matter at hand, which is introducing today's episode. First, let me mention that I got quite a bit of feedback from folks after last week's episode with Mariela Cruz. As I suspected, I do think there are other perspectives out there that would want to be added to that conversation, and it is likely that there will be some follow-up episodes coming for those of you who are curious about that. Also, I did get a little bit of feedback from some listeners that not everybody is into these conversations I've been having with people about their yoga centers and if they're managing to make enough money. Like Paul, shout out to Paul if he's listening to this. Paul sent me an email and he was kind enough to tell me his honest opinion about how he has been less interested in some of those episodes that are a little bit more about the industry. And I get it, and I apologize if that's you. But I'm going to be real with you. For me personally, in order to do this every week, it has to feel important and inspiring and fueling my own needs as well. Otherwise, there's no way I could motivate to do it for as long as I have. And right now in my situation, it's the next 3 to 6 months feels like a little bit of a make or break situation for me in certain ways. And I just can't bring myself to geek out on the Bhagavad Gita or the sutras right now. It's I'm trying to figure out if this yoga center I opened is going to be able to survive or not. And so I've really needed the perspective of others. I needed to hear from people who are out there finding a way to make it work right now. And how are they doing that? So that is what we're talking about today. And if you're less interested in that, I would invite you to come back next week because I do have something of a little bit of a different flavor coming as well. But for today, we're trying to figure out how to present yoga in a way that encourages people to value it and in a way that honors teachers and allows for the business to be a little bit more sustainable, and how it might be different now than it was compared to, say, even 6 years ago. So I'm happy to say that my guest today, Danielle Kunz Dwyer, is such a person, and we actually connected many years ago via email, which I didn't really remember so much until we got to talking, but Danielle has managed to keep a teaching practice going, and she has a center in Switzerland, and it was really great to connect with her and find out what she's doing and do a little mind meld on what are the first principles of yoga that are really keeping us going. So very cool to have had this chance to speak with her. I'm happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, if you enjoy this show and you would like to connect with me in other ways, there's definitely opportunities for us to do that. I would encourage you to check out my ongoing live classes or weekly discussion group. There's on-demand continuing education videos. I also have a teacher training program, or maybe you would just like to dive into the full-length archives of the show and become a supporter with a podcast premium subscription. You can find all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, like I said, I got a dinner to get to, so we're keeping this short and sweet. I will touch base with you on the other side for a moment, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Danielle Kunz Dwyer. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Jay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Is my sound okay?
Yes, you sound just fine. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful. Well, so good to meet you.
Yes, very nice to meet you. Finally, I feel like I know you, like I mentioned in the mail, because I've been listening to your podcast for so long.
Well, you know the deal then. We're already recording, okay? So let's consider ourselves having just begun.
Right.
Very good. Well, I went to look back to see if I could find the email exchange we had, but I actually have to go back to another email account that I used to use that now gets forwarded. So I don't really remember. Can you remind me of what that email exchange was?
Sure. You mean in the pandemic time?
I guess you had mentioned something that you had reached out to me at another time and I had gotten back to you.
Yeah, I reached out to you. I guess it was really probably April, right at the pandemic, so 2020. And, things had just closed here for the first time. And, like everyone else, I was sort of scrambling. I actually had opened my yoga center at the end of 2019. And so I had actually only been open for about, a few months and was caught, of course, by surprise. And I thought of you because I know had been listening to your podcast. I know you had an online offering, and I reached out to you then and, was just wondering if you had any guidance about, moving online. And you were, so generous. You gave me all of the right info right away. I'm actually still using my Samson
Yes.
microphone, which works perfectly. It's so funny. I just followed your instructions because I had no experience. And I was so grateful because it really saved me. I initially, when we had to close, I hadn't really considered going online, and my husband said, Danielle, you've got to do it. And then once I got rolling, once it started, I actually quite enjoyed the process, by and large. But anyway, so we had an exchange at that point, and yeah, you were just so open and generous with all the tips, and I was really...
Well, I do remember because you were not the only person who reached out to me at that time.
Yeah.
And I wrote that email specifically because I felt like I was observing that there was a bit of a thing happening where people were starting to develop these softwares to do it all for you and kind of rein yoga teachers into a thing that I didn't think was healthy. There was a way to do it where it actually wasn't that complicated, and you could just definitely do it. I would think I was saying something like you just need an email list and a Zoom account,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a decent microphone. And I had some options that I put on there, different priced options. So that's pretty cool that worked for you. I just felt I don't know. I didn't like the idea of yoga teachers ended up getting exploited, and I just felt like it should all be open source. We should all know all these tools were available for us to utilize. So I'm glad you did.
Yeah, it was wonderful, and I think you saved me really a lot of time just having to figure it out on my own, and just getting really to a very simple, efficient system that I still use now.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Before you opened the center, what was leading up to the center? How long had you been teaching before you decided to do such a crazy thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can actually take it even a little bit further back if you want, because I was sort of aware of you because I used to live in your neighborhood when you had your studio. Oh,
yes, but we didn't meet, but you knew of the center, you said, right?
Yeah. So you were on Metropolitan, right? Your studio?
Yes, on the corner of Lorimer and Metropolitan.
Exactly. So I was living in Williamsburg for a few years. And when did your center open? When?
I was
How long?
there from 2007 to 2017.
Okay, so I must have been living there before you opened, and had actually moved from Boston, and I'm not exactly sure. It was probably 2003, 2004, and was living with my boyfriend at the time, kind of around the Lorimer stop, and I lived and worked in Brooklyn and Williamsburg.
Okay. Were you going to yoga classes at that time?
Yeah, I actually, I had come from an art background. I was working still in the fine arts, but I had been practicing yoga for a really long time. I actually started when I was 18 years old in college.
And that was in Boston?
No, actually, that was in Saratoga Springs, New York.
Oh, okay.
It was a really small basement studio. My teacher was a little bit older. She was, I think, I think she was in her 80s at that time. And she was just the best. It's something I always come back to, the feeling of that studio. It was just a small group of people. It was my first experience with yoga. And I had just like a profound experience from the very beginning.
That is interesting. It was a little studio in her house.
It wasn't in her house. She rented a space in the middle of the town.
Yeah.
But it was just a very modest space. I guess that's my point. And, like no frills. And I don't even really remember what it looked like. The lights were always sort of dim.
No intro student offers, huh? Just
No, it was super old school. She was a Kripalu teacher.
Yeah.
It was really somatic oriented.
Okay.
I think it was sort of, it was also Hatha oriented, was sort of before like this vinyasa flow kind of took over.
Wave, yes, I know exactly
world.
of which you speak. There was a kind of wave of vinyasa, power vinyasa that happened.
Yeah. So this was much more, just kind of, I guess, traditional yoga. And I immediately had like a really profound experience. And I just remember thinking to myself, I don't really know what this is, but I'm going to stay close to this stuff. I'm going to try and do as much of it as I can. So it followed me through the years as I was sort of making my way as a fine artist. And I kind of always had in the background, maybe someday I'll take it up a little more seriously and study. I could imagine wanting to teach someday. I kind of had that in the back of my head way, way back then.
Mm-hmm.
And
where were you practicing when you were living in Williamsburg?
Yeah, so when I went to Williamsburg, I'm not really, if I was trying to think about it actually before we first began speaking. I think I was looking to study both yoga and Ayurveda. Mm-hmm. And that brought me to a small studio in Manhattan, which was on the Upper East Side, called Prana Mandir, and my teacher was named Leah Kramer. She was a wonderful teacher. She is a wonderful teacher. The studio moved around, I think, 3 times while I was studying with her. And I think I also sort of appreciated, because I lived and worked in Williamsburg, just kind of moving in the other direction. I remember I always had to take the L train and then switch at Union Square, and it was so hard to go against the reverse crowd.
Yes. Yes, I know that long hallway you got to take to transfer over to the hub at Union Square. I remember doing it many times myself.
Yeah, so I ended up mostly practicing there for most of the time then that I was in New York. I did teacher training with her right away. And like I said, I was doing some Ayurveda studies that she was doing kind of with a partner school. And, on the side, there was also another studio, I don't know if you remember, called Yoga Sutra.
Yes, I remember. Who was the head? Who opened that place? I remember it.
That was a bigger operation. I don't remember who the owners were, but it was all like Krishnamacharya.
Yes,
lineages.
that's right.
So
that's why I knew. Yes, yes, yes. It was like I remember it. There's quite like serious studies, if I recall. Like that's the way they kind of were billing themselves.
Yeah, it was a really nice studio. I think I went there because with Leah, I was studying a little bit of everything, and she introduced us to the Ashtanga practice. And I actually wanted to try like a Mysore style practice, and that's a place that I could do it.
Hmm.
And it was for me at that time really good because, living in New York, it's so high impact and so high stress that I really needed so much physicality to get in my body every day.
Hmm.
Um, so I reverse commuted into Manhattan almost every day to do yoga at that time, even on the weekends.
I mean, it's interesting only just to pause for a second that I remember that time, and that wasn't necessarily the most kind of like popular route of yoga at that time, to go from like small classes like you started and then to there wasn't a lot of people doing Ayurveda as well at that time, if I recall, because there really was like a power yoga craze everywhere.
Yeah.
Ashtanga was really on the rise and all the gyms started having the classes and you could kind of get yoga in a lot of different places. And there was some really, there was Jiva Mukti and there was Om and there was like all these like big kind of popular centers that were really kind of these big hubs. And then there was a million other little small places.
There was so much yoga. I mean, it was everywhere. And I kind of
Yeah.
was thinking because I think when you opened your studio, I must have somehow been aware of it or, walking by, and I knew that you were teaching like in the lineage of Deskachar somehow. Maybe I saw it on your website, and I always planned to go to you.
Hmm.
And you know how it is in New York, you've just got so much going on, and I just never did. But I did end up, after I finished my studies with Leah, I actually went to a school with a teacher, I guess, that because he's been on your podcast, with Chase Bossart. You know
Oh,
Chase
yes,
Bossart?
I know Chase well. He's great.
Yeah. So he, along with a couple of other teachers, started a program which was actually in Long Island, and it was supposed to be sort of a longer training um, in the Vini Yoga lineage,
Mhm.
and then I started doing that for the beginning, and I wasn't able to finish it because in the middle of that program, I actually ended up moving to Switzerland.
That's
Um,
right. So you moved to Switzerland. What prompted that big move?
it's kind of a long story, but I can try and do my best. When I was, it is a little bit related just to the whole yoga practice and my personal path. When I was studying at the smaller studio, Prana Mandir, that was, I would say, my yoga home, while I was in New York.
Mhm.
And she always taught, she would teach like a Hatha Vinyasa class, and then she always taught after also a Kundalini class. So she had both backgrounds, and I would occasionally stay for both because I was doing so much yoga. I guess I just really needed it at that time of my life. And at one point, it wasn't with her, but I went out to like a tea or something with a man that was also practicing there who was also a Kundalini yogi. And we kind of exchanged, and he gave me actually a practice from the Kundalini tradition. I was talking about kind of being at a crossroads in my life but not really knowing, how to move forward. I felt a little bit disenchanted with the art world, which was, how I was working, and I had always been really surrounded by a lot of artists and musicians. That was kind of my social scene. And somehow I sort of was sensing that that period of my life was sort of slowly not so much in alignment. And, my yoga path that was always growing at that point was still very much in alignment, but I didn't really know how to move forward with that.
Hmm.
Um, and anyways, so I was having a lunch or tea, I don't remember, with this Kundalini yoga practitioner, and he gave me this practice. And I actually took that practice home.
And when you say that, did he like write it out or something, like a Kriya or something?
It was a Kriya, and he told it to me, and I wrote it down. And I'm probably understating the amount of the sense of the crossroads. I really was in a low point in a sense. I
get it. There's those inflection moments. I know what you mean. And that's where like the most yoga happens ever in your life, right there. I get it.
Absolutely. So I was kind of like, I just felt I was ready to try something. So I woke up very early in the morning. I did that Kriya, and I asked for basically, God's grace to see me through what should be happening in my life. And, that day happened. I don't remember exactly. It was a normal day. I think I went to work and came home and etc. I went to bed that night, and I woke up in the morning. I believe I did the Kriya and practice again. And then I was on my way. I had to take a train ride, actually outside of the city, related to my Ayurveda studies, to my supervisor's house. I think it was actually in New Jersey. And somehow on this train ride, it's such a hard thing to explain, but I literally felt like all of the things, all of the veils that were keeping me from sort of seeing my situation as it was in full capacity, they just disappeared. And I suddenly had like an understanding of knowing of all of these things in my life that really weren't in alignment, including my relationship at the time. It was
and like it was an instant. It was like you're just on the subway train and all of a sudden it's like, boom, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like that?
It sounds strange.
No, it doesn't sound strange to me at all, but
that's kind of how I remember it.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of how I remember it. And it started specifically with the relationship that I was in, which I knew was sort of like always like, it felt like going upstream. I didn't, know how to make it go better. I wanted to be in it, but I don't know, it was really a struggle. And
well, sometimes I know like, if you're like in a relationship that's maybe not working or not in alignment, as you're saying, and some part of you kind of knows for a while, even though you're still in it for a while, because you're not sure, but then at a moment you just admit it to yourself. You're like, yeah, no, this isn't the right thing.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, but I feel like that is probably true, but that knowing was so covered by either a denial or it was so subconscious. I really didn't see it until I did.
Yes. So you feel like it was an awakening moment and you're connecting it to the Kundalini Kriya you were doing.
You never know.
Yeah.
But it was an awakening moment. I would say it was an awakening moment because after that period, it was sort of like that was sort of one brick. And then these other bricks sort of got loose and started to,
Yeah, it wasn't just about your relationship. It was about the whole picture or whatever.
That's just how it began.
Yeah,
That's just how it began. And then it was sort of, the whole thing sort of, just falling apart in a way. And it was very immediate. It was very quickly. I think once I realized, which really did seem overnight, but it was in the process, I guess, of this week, kind of seeing how this all was happening. Once that happened, I couldn't just go on. I realized I had to move on this knowing.
Yeah. Once you get when you get down on your knees and you do the Kriya and you pray and say, please help me, show me some guidance. And then all of a sudden a thing happens. It feels like it's guidance. You got to do the thing.
You got to do the thing. And
you got to do whatever it says. You got to listen. You asked, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And who's to say if it was the Kriya or if it was actually the question itself? Am I willing to just surrender to
maybe who knows, but the practices. See, that's an interesting question for me because I've been teaching practices, whatever, not Kundalini Kriyas, but just breathing and moving practices for a lot of years. And I didn't always connect that with kind of that space of prayer or whatnot, or devotional space or whatever we want to call it that you were describing, where you were reaching out to something bigger than yourself. And I do now. And I think that the practices often set a stage or kind of bring about a state in you that is conducive to you being intimate with something holy and sacred,
Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that.
So you decide to move to Switzerland?
No, so there was a few steps in between there. So to be honest, I ended up, I'm moving out of my apartment. I rented a friend of a friend had a place I could stay in Hell's Kitchen of all places. And I was temporarily staying there. It was like the loudest part of New York. And I guess the reason why I say this was a little bit still kind of in this feeling of an awakening, because I remember, before, the impulse to do something came, there was a huge kind of void period where I was like walking around the city. I couldn't sleep very much. And everything had kind of shifted. So I didn't really know at that point, what was what. And I remember specifically sometimes, people would invite me to a party or something, and I would go to the party just to do something. And, always the first questions people ask you, after your name, what do you do and where do you live and all of these things. And I remember at that point, I actually couldn't answer any of the questions.
You're like, well, I don't really know anymore. I don't know what I do anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I knew my name and I didn't really know anything else. And I guess because it was in this period of real unknowing, it had for me a little bit of an emotional edge. And it was sort of a big shakeup. It was a big shakeup.
I get it. It's like you're at some party and there's like an icebreaker. So what do you do? And then like you have to like launch into the like shadow work that you're doing,
I also mentioned that story because, when I did shift to Switzerland, something else happened. And I think it's also kind of interesting because it's a cultural difference. So I'll come back to that. But, more or less over a period of time, I realized that the only thing that keeping me in New York was these programs I was involved with the yoga and Ayurveda, which I was still very aligned with, but my job and, everything else was sort of, and just the lifestyle of being in the city, it just was too much for my nervous system.
Yeah, and it was changing too and just getting harder. I mean, you mentioned being part of an artist community in Williamsburg.
Yeah.
I remember my wife had like her friends and her all rented out like the floor of a warehouse that became the Gretsch building. You remember the Gretsch building? Which became like super high priced, all these areas of Williamsburg. They used to be like dirt cheap artist lofts that nobody wanted to live in are now like these multi-million-dollar condos and stuff. So that whole area, like when I opened the center in 2007, you could be an artist and have an apartment in Williamsburg that was cheap enough where you didn't have to make a lot of money to live there.
Yeah.
And I had 10 years in the Lower East Side before that, where it was the same. It was like I had an apartment for $450 a month for 10 years.
Yeah. So times were changing fast.
Yeah. And you could feel like people, I remember I was just recently reading a blog post I wrote at that time. And I was saying how, first it was Greenwich Village, then it was the Lower East Side, then everybody jumped over to Williamsburg. Like all the artists were finding the place where you could find the cheap rents and still do the thing. But
Right.
at a certain point in the early aughts, right around where it sounds like you were at this time,
Yeah.
there just wasn't a clear next move. Everything was getting too expensive again. But I remember people talking about going to Germany or to Detroit, to Philadelphia or Detroit, or
Right.
like
And
people were trying to find where the artists go, you know?
there were some alternatives. Yeah. And the same thing happened actually in the artist community that I was living in Boston, which was also kind of the same thing. I had actually moved out. I'd lived in a loft for years, and before I was in New York, and it got priced out, and now it's luxury condos mostly. So
Yeah.
it's just, that cycle. And I think even when I was in Williamsburg, there was something about it, as cool as it was with all the restaurants and the shops, and I had a really great time there. I just remember somehow being around all these artists and art, and I sort of started to feel like, when did art so much become about art more than it became about life, And I just had this feeling of like a disenchantment with the whole thing, not art itself, but just
The scene. I know what you
like
mean.
a little bit the scene, and also just with myself, just being like, I need more life if I really want to make good art, life living, not just in this sort of cocoon. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yes, that is interesting to hear you say all that. And I think it's true in yoga as well. Like it just started out as a very like rogue thing, and then it got kind of scaled.
Yeah.
And I don't know when's the last time you were in Williamsburg? There's like an Apple store there now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Actually, it's been a really long time. I
It's
think I went
super
back.
high end. You can't afford to live there now. It's like
No.
totally totally
Wow.
transformed different place.
Yeah, it's
So
been a
I
few years.
Yeah, no, I get it. And so why Switzerland?
So, anyways, I was in this sort of void period of me floating around the city and trying to figure out what I was going to do. I ended up, out of the blue, actually, an ex-boyfriend of mine from like years and years ago that I met while he was studying music in Berkeley, got in touch with me, and he had just come out of a relationship himself, and we were, sending emails back and forth, and it was lighthearted, but it was also a welcome, it was something, positive moving in my direction.
Mm.
And I was quite fond of him many, many years ago when we were together. And he, sent me basically a message and with an idea maybe that we could travel together. We both had sort of a space opening up. And I was actually supposed to be going to India to do some further training with Panchakarma in the Ayurveda program that I was involved in.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this money saved and I was all ready to go do that. And I realized, it just doesn't make sense in the sort of bigger picture of my life.
Mm.
And I wanted to move out of New York. I realized it just wasn't suiting my temperament. Living a healthy lifestyle seems like
All that Ayurvedic learning, you're like, you know what? All the inputs I'm getting in this place. That's what I thought at a certain point. I felt that way. I was like, oh, I need different inputs.
yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
everyone's eating out, and it was hard to implement there. It was too hard.
Yeah.
Not that it's impossible, but just for me. Anyways, so I kind of decided, I'd leave New York. I didn't really know where I was going, but I thought this plan to maybe travel initially, starting with this visit with my ex, sounded like a good idea. So I rerouted myself, not with any plans to actually come here and move here by any means, but it was just like I said, I had sort of this open space and I had money saved, and I decided to change the direction. So I ended up coming to Switzerland. We spent some time together, and I ended up staying here for longer than I planned.
Mm-hmm.
You can stay here, I think, 3 months with, a visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up staying here that whole time. And, within that short period of time, it became clear that, there was a romantic connection, with my now husband. And in a short time, we decided that we were going to give it a try. So I was back and forth in 2008 and then ended up moving and settling here in 2009 and in the town actually that he grew up in the central part of the German part of Switzerland.
I see. And so when you make that move, you have an opportunity to kind of, it's a clean slate in some regards, right? You don't have any connection to that town.
Genau, genau, exactly. It's a clean. That's my German sneaking out there. It's a clean slate. Such an interesting thing to happen, in your life. And I didn't know anyone except for him. I didn't know the language. I didn't have a job, although I did have a job connection that was similar to what I was doing in New York, in Zurich. But I ended up not pursuing that because I realized, you know what, I didn't come all the way to do the same thing here.
Right.
So for a certain amount of time, I kind of had a lot of open space. I began to study German. I spent a lot of time in the forest, and I just started to acclimate to slower living, And that actually was kind of a process because if you're used to moving from Williamsburg to Union Square through the trains, you move at a certain pace, with a certain assertiveness. And I remember my husband all the time was like, "Why are you walking so fast?"
Yes, that is so funny. I used to walk so fast and people would comment. And that's why, because you condition your system in a way to have these like, oh, I've got 40 minutes to get into the city to get to that thing and not be late.
Yeah.
And it's like a bit of a crapshoot because the trains run how the trains run, and hopefully they come like they normally do. If they don't, you're screwed kind of thing. So there's like a high stress kind of get there thing, and it's kind of, you're kind of rolling, and like you said, you're going out to dinner and then you're kind of staying up late, and like that kind of whole lifestyle. And while you're in it, a lot of times you sort of fantasize of like, oh God, I wish I didn't have such a crazy schedule, and what would it be like if I had more space in my life?
Yeah.
But then when you actually do what you did and kind of create that space where you're like, maybe you don't have to be anywhere or do anything all day, then it's a whole different challenge, isn't it?
I was going to say it was positive, but it was also a shock.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like a whole other kind of thing, a whole different challenge. It's not necessarily as easy as you thought it would be.
No, I mean, I was kind of still in a void. And like I told that story about the parties because then it sort of something interesting happened. So when I came here and I started, I wasn't super social, but just every once in a while, my husband would invite me to one of his musical events or something, and he would introduce me to some people. And so interesting, no one really ever asks those questions that everyone asks in New York, those where you feel like you have to prove yourself in the first 5 minutes of every conversation. There's sort of this competitive
it's like
air.
You're being scrutinized on a class level or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Or I don't know if it's class or just kind of like, who are you? And I don't know. Just everyone is,
So what sort of questions did you get asked in Switzerland?
It's so strange because sometimes people don't even rush to exchange names. People here, it's changing a bit, but it takes people longer to use a first name. And there's the formal and the informal, which as an American is quite a foreign concept in the language structure. And, people would just, talk to you. I mean, of course, they would maybe ask me some questions about where I was from, but it's just a different, I don't know, in a way, it's kind of more of an introverted country. Not that everyone is introverted, but there's just a certain whereas in New York, I always felt like you have to kind of prove yourself within the first few minutes. Here, it was sort of like, there's a sense of feeling of respect until proven otherwise. You know what I mean? Like there's just sort of like, people just speak to you about whatever. So,
well, it's very interesting too. I have been to Switzerland, And I
Yeah.
spent more time in Finland than I spent in Switzerland, but I did spend a little bit of time in Switzerland. And you're right. It was like people tended to not be as kind of like outgoing and extroverted as I was coming from New York.
Yeah.
And they was sometimes like, especially in Finland, like people were really hard to read.
Yeah.
Like they would like me and I would think they didn't, just because I couldn't tell. They weren't showing it on the outside,
Yeah, that can be true here too,
Yeah.
definitely. And depending on what part of Switzerland you're in, the German part or the French part. I mean, the German part I would say is a little bit like that, and the French part is maybe a little bit different, and the Italian part as well. But yeah, it was a different experience. So that in a way was kind of, I would not say it was super comfortable, just this sort of, still this continued not knowing, but it was really actually kind of an amazing experience because it allowed me to kind of disidentify from all of these things I was so hyper identified with being an artist and, that being my worth and just a lot of things that I thought, were integral to me. And I realized even when some of that fell away, there I am. I'm still here. And actually, I'm enjoying myself a little more. It's more spacious. So there was.
Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say there was a little bit of an unwinding, I would say, an unwinding period.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also interesting to me that you have this opportunity to kind of remake yourself into whatever you want to be at that point, because you do have a clean slate and you don't have all the same baggage and external identifiers as to who and what you are that you had in New York.
Yeah.
And at some point you decide to open a yoga center.
Yeah, so it was in some baby steps still. I started teaching first, I did end up teaching English for a while, which was a good experience to learn a little bit more the culture and have time to learn the language. I tried to teach yoga right away, but I didn't have enough German, so it seemed a bit awkward, kind of. I couldn't really make that connection. And where I live, it would be different in Zurich or Basel, but there weren't as many English. A lot of people speak English, but maybe not so comfortably that they wanted to take a yoga class in English.
Yeah.
So I put that a little bit on the side. I ended up having my son, who's now 14, but at the time, I just enjoyed being a new mom. And it took a couple of years. I think when he was 2, I started to feel a little bit of a nudge to maybe take a small step in teaching yoga. So I actually started one class at a studio of my friend and did that for some time. And then a few years later, ended up teaching at a local college here. And that led to a job offer at a gym, actually, which was another sort of the really, really nice people, very supportive, who wanted to have a yoga class or kind of a small yoga program in the gym. And I did that for a couple of years. And actually, amazingly, a lot of those people, or a portion of those people that started with me then, which was probably 10 years ago, are still coming to my studio now, are still coming to yoga. So it was not like a really ideal room for yoga, but when I think back on it, I was so happy to be teaching yoga that it didn't matter. And the yoga was just as special as it is now in my nice, yoga room. And I was just so grateful for that opportunity, and I learned to teach in German. And
I guess my question there is, I know like my friend who I knew in Switzerland, she had a little studio, and she always taught, though, like it was very seasonal. Like I've had conversations recently, I don't know if you've been listening, about like people selling classes in like series or whatever, or like you pay for 6 weeks at a time or whatever it is, rather than like it's a center with drop-in classes.
Yeah.
Did you witness that in like the yoga scene in Switzerland or anything? Like, Or were they just regular, like in New York, drop in and class packs or whatever?
No, it was already based when I came here more like on a subscription model, which was foreign to me. And I remember that friend that had the studio that let me teach. And when I initially, moved, actually, so the gym was the thing I did for a couple of years. And then I shared a small space in between the space that I'm in now. And when I became self-employed, then she gave me her like business model kind of as a guide, which was basically built on a subscription in which you could, you had a certain validity date for a 10 class pack or et cetera. And when I remember when I first read through it, I'm like, I can't do that. That's so strict,
You got to enforce the expiration dates, right?
Right. And of course, here I am like the yoga teacher and you just, you have like all these, good vibes with everyone. And it was a little bit, it just seemed kind of strange. But I have to say, I'm still using that model and I'm so grateful that I am, because that's another reason why I think I still have a studio, because people
You think? I mean, it's a big question for me right now, because it's
Are you using
a mixed bag. On the one hand, it's about people utilizing that as like a disciplinary tool even. I really want to come. I'm going to buy these classes. I'm going to use these classes.
Yeah.
But then it means also if they don't use the classes and the next time they come, there's like classes left on their previous card, but they've expired. That can either go two ways. Either they can like eat it and then be like, okay, well, I got it. That's on me. Or it feels like kind of jerky and suddenly becomes about money and making money off of people or whatever. It's just like it's such a sticky thing I'm trying to avoid, but I don't know if you can.
You know what? I think sometimes that's sort of, I think, how I felt when I first came upon it.
Yeah.
But now that I've been using it for a few years, it is, I think, the only reason why I have my studio. And to be honest, I don't have that many situations where people haven't used it, and it happens not that often because I try to make everyone aware, of the policy. And, of course, if someone's injured or something, there's always exceptions. But the truth is, my studio, even if the yoga was free, I know sometimes you say that the heat still costs. I still have to pay for the space, which is not inexpensive. I have the, the Zoom, there's all these costs. So it's not a free thing. So I have to, if I want to have an offer to offer, it needs to be sustainable, and it has to also be sustainable enough that I have enough energy to do a good job and give people a good class. And
exactly. That's a very good point. Sustainable enough that you can actually be sane.
Be sane and be happy, because I think yoga is it's so sensitive about where you're at.
Well, I guess are you doing like tiered memberships where you can pay different monthly prices for different amount of classes, like 5 class or 10 class a month or whatever it is?
I pretty much only had 2 options. I had a 10 class and a 20 class, but that's not the length. That's actually just if someone comes once or twice a week.
Right.
And then just in the pandemic time, I don't remember, just a couple of years ago, I decided to make another offering for people that, for whatever reason, maybe they have a job that is, like a nurse or something that has shift work, or someone that has, kids, a family, and, is often finding that they're sick or having to take care of sick kids. I offer like one which has a longer validity, so that you would be able to miss more, but it's a little more expensive.
Right.
And I find that most people don't take that one, but it gives me a good feeling that I can offer that to people, especially knowing that maybe for the rare people that really can't make it happen.
That's interesting. You pay more for the classes to last longer, so you have more time to use.
Yeah, it's like slightly more. But, the truth is, Jay, like one thing that I've realized is I don't really like this whole drop-in vibe. I'm not really that interested in teaching yoga to strangers. I love, not that I have to know everyone before they come to the studio, but what really, really interests me at this point of my life is, having long-term students and seeing people's practices grow and growing together and evolving. And for that, if people really want to move in a deeper way into their yoga practice beyond physical postures.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I've been really thinking I should do it, but here's the other thing. Like, it feels like everything I do these days, it's like a contract. Like, I had to go get a new iPhone for my daughter, and it's like getting a mortgage, I mean, it's just everything. And when you went to that class in that little room back in, up in upstate New York or wherever you were.
Saratoga, yeah.
Saratoga, you weren't, she probably was just doing $15 per class like I'm doing right now or whatever. Like, she wasn't doing like membership things, was she?
No, I totally agree with you. But the thing that I've realized is it kind of goes back, if I can be a yoga dork, to this Sthira Sukha thing.
Yeah.
A certain amount of stability and a certain amount of openness.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.